we've been working on attracting new manufacturing in Belvidere with Stellantis for almost 2 years. So it wasn't much of a surprise to me that there was an opportunity, but the big surprise was how big the opportunity turned out to be. So just to remind all of you, a couple of years ago, they had laid people off. They still had 1,200 or 1,300 people working in Belvidere at the Stellantis plant. But it was clear that the Jeep Cherokee, which was produced there, and they had another vehicle, and they were on the decline. Mm-hmm. And so you could see that if something didn't change, that facility was going to close. And it did, in fact. So but before it did, began conversations with Stellantis about their future. What are you going to do in the EV world? What are your plans? You've got this great plant here. Can't you convert it to other uses? They do not have one single electric vehicle, not one. At Stellantis, they produce hybrids, they produce gas-powered, but so this was potentially an opportunity. But we needed to convince them, work with them on this, so we did. Then they decided to close the plant that was producing vehicles at the time, so it became even more urgent. We had 1,300 people that were out of work at that point from the closure, and working all the way through, we knew that there was going to be an UAW contract negotiation / strike in September of this year. They closed the plant, or they furloughed everybody, I think, in February of 2023. So we were in constant conversation with them, knowing that they weren't going to make any decisions until they had a contract. And so leading into September, we knew there was going to be a strike at that point. So now it became a question of, all right, when the strike resolves, is Belvidere on everybody's mind or not? And during the course of the strike, I had lots of conversations with Stellantis, had been in constant communication with them, obviously with UAW also, and the White House. The White House very involved in helping to reach a conclusion in this UAW strike, not taking sides exactly, but certainly engaged in making sure that the U.S. economy wasn't going to falter because the auto industry was on strike writ large. So long story short is that the big surprise to me was not that we were going to have the potential for reopening a plant, because I was aware that this was, the UAW had this on the table as they were negotiating. They wanted to make sure that it reopened. I was working hard on it. The White House was aware that it was being discussed. The big surprise was it going to be a battery plant? Was it going to be an assembly plant? Which one of those? And I was okay either way, because we're going to bring back a lot of jobs, more jobs, in fact, than the 1,300. The big surprise was they are talking about putting both plants there. So this is $5 billion of investment. This is thousands of jobs, like not 1,300, but maybe 3,000 plus jobs in Belvidere. There's still work to do. We're still talking to Stellantis about the incentives and so on. They've got support from the White House for some federal programs. But I feel very confident about what will be a brand new opportunity in Belvidere for, like I said, billions of dollars and thousands of people.
So still sticking with plants, we obviously have a big plant on the southeast side of Chicago,
yes,
in the Ford Torrance plant. Any similar conversations going on about the EV future there?
There is not an EV company in the country that hasn't talked to me. And I'm very happy about that. Some of them are inbound calls, some of them are outbound calls. They started as outbound calls, I might say, when I came into office, right? That Ford hadn't talked to a governor in years. And I wanted to make sure that folks who had plants here or were thinking about potentially moving to some other state or opening in a new state had heard from me. So I talked to Ford starting in 2019 about the plant there. They'd had challenges there,
yep.
And so I wanted to hear them tell me what the challenges were. and wanted to try to figure out what we could do to attract potentially an EV plant. This is before we had any incentives in place or anything. So fast forward, we've obviously been talking to every company in the EV space, and we've had good conversations with Ford. Very important to me that we continue to make investments in that Ford plant, and I'm somewhat confident. I mean, they won't tell you exactly what they're thinking until they finally make a decision. I feel somewhat confident that we're going to maintain the plant that's there now, at least. What happens in terms of a conversion is a challenge. One of the issues, just to be clear with everybody, is to do a battery plant and an assembly plant somewhere, it takes a lot of territory. You need a lot of acreage for that. And it's a question whether there are enough acres there at that Ford plant in order to do that conversion. So again, they haven't said no, but because you can convert almost anything, but if you're going to have a battery plant nearby, which is typically what's happened, you're going to do it on a larger footprint. And I'm hopeful that we will get at least the assembly plant continued and growing. Again, battery, not sure.
Right. So obviously the UAW won major salary wins with this new contract. Given how competitive, especially the EV space is, are you concerned at all about the rising labor costs and what the pressure that puts on those companies that you just mentioned, who have shown that they want to invest in Illinois longer term? Is that a challenge for the industry and for Illinois?
Well, let's just level set here. Virtually every company in the electric vehicle space has raised their base salaries, how much they're paying per hour to their workers. Toyota followed the UAW model, and they're not union.
Yeah.
So it isn't as if they've become less competitive. But costs have risen, there's no doubt. But in my view, when costs rise because you're paying your workers more, that's not a bad thing, always. And to me, this is a world where we've had inflation. People have suffered from the inflation over a year and a half, 2 years, and so significant bump in income makes sense to me for the workers. And I think obviously UAW felt the same, and so did the companies. Do they want to pay more for anything? No, companies don't generally want to pay more for much, but if you're going to pay more in order to retain especially the kind of talented workers that have the experience that auto workers do, I think that's a positive thing for those companies.
And obviously more good news about EV in Illinois with the Manteno announcement, building a plant. One of the first of, where Illinois is probably competitive from an incentive standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about there's not a lot of, it's a little unclear exactly how the extent of those incentives, but can you talk a little bit about what?
I think we've been pretty clear about what the incentives are, but so we announced, as some of you know, a battery plant in Manteno. To give you a sense, Manteno itself only has about 9,300 population. So it's not just about Manteno, it's about all the surrounding areas and the people who will move to Manteno to get these 2,600 jobs that are going into Manteno. It's very exciting. This is the largest new plant coming to Illinois in 30 years. So 2,600 jobs is a big deal. It's billions of dollars of investment also. They're making lithium-ion batteries, not just for cars, but they also make them for other kinds of vehicles.
Yeah.
Other kinds of machinery. So it's a terrific new thing. We provided incentives that included two big things that I got accomplished during my term in office, and I want to specifically call out the Illinois Manufacturers Association. Mark Denzler is here. we worked together to create incentives for manufacturers to come to Illinois. We did two things. We changed the way EDGE tax credits work to make them more pliable and workable for businesses. We weren't competitive in that regard, and we needed to change them. The second is we created this REV program, which is, we changed the name, Reimagining Electric Vehicles was the original name, and I think it's Reimagining Energy and Vehicles now. But those two programs together, plus the incentive program, the closing fund that the legislature created for us, which is smaller than most other states, but still significant enough for us to attract businesses. We needed to be competitive with other states. You're competing with, I mean, constantly we're competing with, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas. Those are typically on the list. There are a few others that you hear of along the way, but they have multi-billion-dollar, some of them, closing funds and incentives. We just didn't have anything like that and never have had an economic development strategy for the state of Illinois. Here is the opportunity, I mean, that I can remember anyway, maybe somebody in the audience can remember one, but there isn't an economic development corporation like there is in Michigan, like there is in Ohio, like there is in Texas and so on. So we had to sort of create ours from scratch and those incentives. So those are things that we put into, attracting not just the plant in Manteno, and not just the, potentially the plants in Belvidere, but also we're in discussions with, and this is 5 times more than ever before, about 25 different companies that have come to us, big companies with 1,000 to 4,000 jobs and billions of dollars of investment that have come to the state of Illinois. It's not, in fact, at this point, it's a minority of these deals are because I made an outbound call. People are coming to us wanting to come to the state of Illinois. And the biggest selling point, I know you didn't ask this, but I'm going to tell everybody, the biggest selling point that they come to us and remind us about is the quality of our workforce. The quality of the education system that produces that workforce and the quality of the workforce. That's a big deal. You can't, great that Mississippi wants to throw a bunch of money at a company, but if you're going to plant $1 billion into a facility in Mississippi and you're going to want to be there for 30, 40 years or forever, you need to know that you have high quality workers that are going to be ready to take the jobs, especially if you want to expand. We have that in Illinois. Most other states don't.
You talk about the closing fund, which we talked during the re-election period. That was a big thing on your list to get done.
That's right. I broke that at.
That's right. I remember those things.
I didn't think that would be a headline.
It's a headline for us.
It worked. Thank you.
Yeah. But can you talk a little bit about where we are in terms of competitiveness with those other states that you mentioned, with the regions? It does seem like it's, you're up against another state ratcheting it up every time. Given a company might say, well, our labor costs are high, pension issues. How do you rate?
Nobody mentions pension issues.
Okay.
Only you.
Okay. How would you kind of rate Illinois' competitiveness right now?
It's the best it's been in a long time. We have, and it's not because of we have bigger incentives than other states. We frankly, I would like to not have to provide incentives at all, right? We all want to just have companies show up and do business. The problem is other states are doing it, so you've got to be competitive, at least competitive.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to beat them. In fact, in several cases, including like in Manteno, where there's another plant like it that's being built in Michigan, their incentives were much higher than ours by $200 million, I think, that more than we provided. Right. And they have fewer, not many fewer, but hundreds of fewer jobs. And so, it's a competitive world out there. We've got to be able to compete. So we're more competitive than I think we've been in a very long time. But part of that is we've never had a story to tell, or at least nobody's ever put that story together. And then frankly, between Intersect and the governor's office and the Department of Commerce and the governor, we're all very proactively going out and telling that story. And that's very important. People don't hear from Illinois about what's great about this state before. Now they do. Now they do. And again, you know, education system, healthcare, all those things that you don't think companies are paying attention to, they do. And they're not coming and saying, oh, your tax rate. I mean, no, honestly, nobody is complaining about our tax rate in the state of Illinois. I realize, again, all of us should complain taxes are too high, right? I mean, great, I understand, and nobody wants to pay taxes if they don't have to. But here we are with companies coming to us wanting to do business in the state of Illinois. They're not talking about taxes. They're talking about, can you provide me with the workforce? Do you have the electricity that I need on the property that I need in a place that I need it? You know, these are the kinds of things that companies come and talk to us about. And we never before, not before Dan Seals took over at Intersect, did we have a database of properties in Illinois that are ready to go, you know, build your factory. They want to be able to do this in 18 months, 18 to 24 months. Build something from scratch, you know, and have it ready to go in 18 to 24 months. You need to have water, power, you know, the right kind of size property. It has to be within, you know, some number of miles of Chicago or of some other, you know, location they're looking to be near. And, you know, and once you put those things in front of them and show them, and they already know about our workforce, I think. The fact that we have 48 community colleges in Illinois, it's the third largest community college system in the country, and it's one of the best in the entire country. Again, these are all selling points, and it makes us competitive.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, a big part of your job is to be the chief salesman for the state, right? You're going out there touting what the state can deliver, just as you've done here, but there has been a counter narrative from, let's say, a certain big hedge fund, head of a hedge fund who left. You know, the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal.
Going to a place that has the highest inflation in the country.
That's right.
And where they're having virtually the same crime rate that we have. Yeah. But go ahead.
Do you feel you have to work harder to sell the state than most governors at this point?
So I'm going to give you, I mean, I just this morning saw a statistic that, so when you look at all the states, 9 states in the country have more college graduates in their state today than they've graduated in their state, right? So you've got in-migration in 9 states of college graduates. Those are the highest value workers, the ones who produce the most income, et cetera, right? 9. We're one of those 9. We have 20% more college graduates in Illinois than we produce. Florida has 11% fewer college graduates than they produce. So we're 5th in the country in terms of in-migration of college graduates. With minus 11%, Florida is, I think, 18th, something like that in the country. You know, we've got, I just want to say, people who are down on Illinois are not looking at the right indicators of the future of our state. Our future is bright. We have more, our enrollment numbers are some of the best in our universities and colleges, are some of the best in the country now. We're way above average. Universities have dropped in enrollment, so have community colleges. We're rising. We have more freshmen coming into our colleges. And that's not an accident. It's happening for a variety of reasons. Yes, there's momentum, and that helps. But in part, it's because when I came into office, I mean, one of the things I talked about when I was running was people talk about the out-migration from Illinois, which, as it turns out, we just did a census a couple of years ago. That plus the post-enumeration survey shows that we added 2% to our population in Illinois over the last 10 years. But one of the things I argued when I was coming in thinking that we were dropping population, because everybody was saying it, I was reading it in your magazine, and in the newspaper that shall not be named.
You can name it.
Rhymes with Wibune, and whatever that is. But about the exodus from Illinois, right? And so I'm deeply concerned. I don't want people leaving the state. In fact, I want more and more people coming to the state. So one of the statistics people paid attention to, or should pay attention to, is that the largest population of people who were leaving the state were high school graduates who were not going to college in Illinois because it was unaffordable. Okay, and it was a huge number. So the first thing I did when I came into office was we passed a budget with, I know there are a couple of state representatives and state senators here, we passed a budget that was balanced and significantly increased the amount of college scholarships that we were providing to kids, to young people in Illinois. Well, now that number went from 400 over the course of 4.5 years, 5 budgets. We've gone from a college scholarship fund that was about $400 million when I came into office to now more than $700 million. Every kid that applies now, this was not the case when I came into office, every kid that applies now for a college scholarship under the state's program that is eligible now gets a scholarship. Before, when you applied, you stood in line, and if you were, if we ran out of money at $400 million, you were out of luck that year. You couldn't go to college. Now, every kid that is eligible gets to go. So, look at how that's changed the landscape, and it makes a huge difference for the future of the state when we're educating more and more young people.
Outside of the recent EV wins, what news can you share about your efforts to bring fresh investment and jobs in other areas?
There's a lot to talk about, and I won't spend all my time on it, although I guess we're at a Crane's lunch. I probably should. So, again, 2019, I'm looking at the 2 legislators I can see here. In 2019, we passed a law that made it much more welcoming for data centers to come to Illinois. Well, guess what? We've had $6 billion of data center investments since we passed that law in 2019. It's created jobs in Illinois. It makes us kind of a tech leader. We're the fastest rising state in terms of the number of data centers coming. We just had a $1 billion investment by Meta, the parent of Facebook, in DeKalb, Illinois. Just giving you an example. So that's data centers. We put $200 million in order to attract federal money, into the Chicago Quantum Exchange and at the University of Chicago and University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, 100 each basically, right? Because we wanted to get the federal grants, hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money to come to Illinois, because I want Illinois to be #1 in the development of quantum computing. And guess what? We're #1 in the number of those and amounts of those grants that have gone to any other state. We got more of them, and we got a larger amount coming to Illinois. And again, this stuff is all in research and development, and it's going to take a few more years before you're going to see, what I think will become, people probably hate this expression, but the Silicon Valley of quantum. But imagine what that would do for Illinois if we were the hub of quantum for the nation. And so that's why we made that investment. So that's another area. We just won the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub in Illinois. That's $250 million of private money from the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation to build something they had already done in San Francisco. They had 58 other cities they looked at to put their second one in, and they chose Chicago. And so, we've had a whole bunch of examples of that. And you may say, well, as compared to thousands of jobs at a manufacturing facility, that doesn't seem like a lot. But think what it is if we become truly a major hub for biotechnology. We are rising in that regard. Think about what it means if we're the major hub for quantum. Think about what it means if we're bringing investment in data centers here. It bodes well for the future foundation for our economy in Illinois. So I'm pleased about those kinds of things. Lots more. We have headquarters that have moved. I know everybody wants to go back and focus on, Citadel leaving. But the truth is that we've attracted, seriously, like a half a dozen pretty significant expansions and or new headquarters just to Chicago. I haven't talked about the ones outside of Chicago, but many more jobs created as a result of those expansions and the new headquarters than were lost by virtue of the companies you guys like to cite. So I know everybody was down on Illinois for so many years. And it was easy to be, we had 2 years in this state where there was no budget, and we were racking up bills, and the pension situation was getting worse, and people just felt like it's all heading down a steep embankment, if not a cliff. And the fact is, things are getting better, and I think that all these things build the momentum for the state, and I'm pleased about the direction.
Well, if you want to break some news about what companies you're talking to, you can do that right now.
I'll call you at least second. No.
I want to turn to the migrant issue for a minute here. You've won some praise from editorial pages, including ours, for stepping in and helping Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson respond to the crisis. Infusion of $160 million in state aid. Was there a specific triggering event with that? Was it
winter?
Okay.
I mean, to be honest with you, we've been working together with the city. This is not a knock on the city. The city's been on this, Mayor Lightfoot before Mayor Johnson, since this started happening, since the border politicians started shipping, like cargo sometimes on these buses, people to Illinois in August of 22. So we've all had to work on this, right? The city of Chicago is the major city in the state of Illinois. There's no way you couldn't both be working on this. So for the last, year plus, we've been focused on it. The issue of how to manage, what is a humanitarian crisis as you're heading toward potentially a very cold winter. Last year it was somewhat manageable because there were a lot fewer asylum seekers who had arrived here. This year, much less manageable. We have many more. And you've seen some of them are outside of police stations and in O'Hare Airport. And so looking at that situation, and we've been working on this for months and months, but looking at that situation, there came a point where you're close enough to the very cold weather that we just had to step in and try to step up the effort. The city's done a good job of trying to manage an unmanageable influx. You don't know when the buses are arriving. Nobody from Texas is calling Illinois to say, folks are arriving on this date at this time. Also, the buses that are being sent often are being sent not to the location that we're asking that they be sent to, right? Mm-hmm. But instead just dropped in front of the Willis, do we call it the Willis Tower anymore?
Sure.
Sears Tower, Willis Tower, that big tower. But just that's not a location that we've asked for anybody to be dropped off at. We've had lots of communication with folks in Texas to try to say, okay, everybody, there's a big wide country out there. Why are you focusing it all on, New York, Chicago, Denver, Washington, D.C., and deaf ears, basically, because why? Obviously, it's the politics of it, right? They love to create this kind of challenge and crisis because they think that this will hurt Democrats. Mm-hmm. The fact is, this is a bipartisan problem, the problem of immigration, the challenge of immigration, asylum seekers coming to the border. There ought to be comprehensive immigration reform. There needs to be border security, too. And those two things together, it seems like you could get agreement across the two parties. Hasn't happened. I don't know when it will. But Illinois we decided that, with winter approaching, it's hard not to say winter is coming for all of you. But with winter approaching, we just needed to help in a significant way. There's also a process problem, and I tried to say this in the press conference about it. We had a process problem. People were arriving, and coming off of buses. And sometimes people were actually hoping to go to Michigan or to another state, South Dakota or some other place, because they know somebody there and they want to go there. But they were coming off buses and they were kind of being processed right into shelter instead of where would you like to go? I'm not saying that's a huge number. We think it's about 10%, but that's 10% of your challenge that you could, alleviate.
But to come to a solution, you identified the biggest challenge, and it's politics. So how do you get around politics in order to come to a solution? Something has to happen.
Well, the politics wasn't the politics in Illinois.
No.
The politics was the politics with a governor in Texas who's not answerable to anybody here. Mm-hmm. And, no matter how much communication you have with it, even if you go to Washington, D.C., they've not imposed any restrictions on this. To some degree, you can't. And once to be clear with everybody, an asylum seeker is a legal person in the United States. They are legally here. They have papers. They're allowed to be here. Very different than someone who's undocumented. And we could talk all about that as well. But people who are here with, asylum seeker, heading to an asylum hearing at some point over the next year, the Washington, can't stop people from moving. You're here. The question is, are people moving of their own volition to Chicago? Being sent? And we've examined that as best we can to try to determine. The problem is that if you're being told Nirvana is in Chicago or in New York, right, and you've just arrived in Texas, why wouldn't you go to Nirvana? And the reality is that they're not being told the truth. And winter, we tried to communicate to everybody in Texas, winter is arriving. Yeah. And so hopefully, I think people are seeing the difference today. Folks in Texas who are thinking about getting on a bus and being told something, they understand the reality. I think that's one thing to pay attention to. Don't know because we don't know. We can't talk to everybody. And the other thing is that there is a big difference in how things are being managed here in Chicago to make sure that people are getting shelter, health care, food, and work permits, work authorizations, which you may have seen. We did a press conference, Dick Durbin, the mayor, me, and we made the plea to the president. And for a year, I've been saying it to the White House, and they did finally move on it. And so we are actually processing about 11,000 people to get work authorizations. And once they get work, they will need a lot less services and shelter.
Right. Could take some questions from the audience. Obviously, the top of mind for everybody is on crime in Chicago, and crime in Chicago is, and what we're really going to do about it. This is the most unsafe I've ever felt here in 20 plus years. Do you have an answer for that?
Do I have an answer for crime?
Well, how should the issue of crime be addressed at this moment?
Well, it's certainly an ongoing issue, not new. A couple of things I'll say. First, I hope everybody will go and track it for yourselves. Crime in the city of Chicago, violent crime, let's start with that, because I think that's the thing we should all be most concerned about. Every crime is of concern. Violent crime actually has been coming down for 3 years, but in particular over the last year. Violent crime is coming down. Does it make everybody feel safer to know that? Not yet, but it is true, and you should go look at the statistics. The city of Chicago CPD publishes statistics. You can see where the problem areas are, right, with car theft and robberies and so on. But shootings and murders have come down significantly. Again, doesn't make anybody feel safer to just hear a statistic. It will take some time, but that's something people should know. What should we be doing about it? Well, I do think the mayor, you should give some credit, in my view, to the mayor. He has chosen good people to help lead CPD. We have seen the work that they're doing, even in the short period of time. The new superintendent, as well as the one who served for 6 months, Waller, I think have been doing good work. You've got to do a lot of work on the ground in order to help reduce crime. At the state level, what we've been doing to assist, two things. One is, just to take you back, my predecessor significantly defunded violence intervention programs in the state. And when you do that, and these are jobs for youth, and these are the former gang members who've made their lives right, and they are attempting to get kids out of gangs and to help them get on a good path. These programs are effective. They've been proven effective over many years. When you defund them, guess what happens? Because they're generally small, bunch of small organizations. When you defund a small organization, what happens? It closes down. And when it closes down, someone has to start it up again. And that's very hard. When you've got something up and running, keep it going, especially if it's working. That happened under my predecessor. For 2 years, no budget in the state of Illinois. Those programs shut down across the city and all across the state. So we had to refund those things, and it takes time for them to get better at what they do, to go hire enough people, to have steady budgets so they can get the job done. And they are beginning, and you can look at where we put the money from the state level. You can go look at those neighborhoods. The crime levels in those neighborhoods have come down significantly. So those are the other kinds of investments you need to make. Again, the mayor's doing a good job, I think, of getting the CPD moving in the right direction. And I think the state has done a good job of investing in kind of the overcoming the underlying causes. It's going to take some time, like a lot of things that you're trying to overcome in Illinois. It takes a little bit of time to get real success, but it's going in the right direction.
I mean, Chicago is going to be on a national stage in several months, with the convention coming here. Yep. How important is that in terms of the narrative that we discussed about Chicago crime, the migrant issue, of that getting?
I think there will be critics. There's no doubt. And by the way, I think the Republicans are going to do everything they can to stoke any challenge that we have, including sending more buses. They'll try to do that. But I feel good about first of all, the city's going to be secure. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there's every level of law enforcement is on the ground already here planning for that convention, just like they did when NATO came, just like they do when any major event goes to a major city, between Secret Service, FBI, local law enforcement, county, state. Everybody is working together, and they've got real strategic plans for managing what is always a target for terrorism and all the way down to crime. And so the city, I think, will see a lot of safety for around the convention. Will there be crime in the city? Of course, there will be crime in this. I mean, I'm sorry to say, of course. But I feel good about our ability, or at least the city's ability and the state's ability and the Fed's ability to manage that major event over those 4 important days. Mm-hmm.
So obviously, and we're running out of time here, unfortunately, but we talk about, we're about to embark on a huge presidential election season. And, when they talk about President Biden's age and ability to possibly do another 4-year term, your name, among others, pops up as a possible, someone to step in that situation.
In what situation?
If he were to decide not to run again.
Well, I think he's decided. He announced already he's running for re-election, and I'm supporting him. And I think he's done. Listen, I know that everybody's going to have opinions early on, and age keeps getting brought up by a lot of people. First, let's not forget the senility and craziness of the other aging candidate that's running. So I think that will play a factor as well if people want to talk about age. But the reality about President Biden is, and I've spent a lot of time personally with him now, I can tell you that the man is on. He's on it. He is, you can see that he is, whether you agree or disagree, he is managing several crises internationally every day, as well as has gotten more done in nearly 3 years now as president for working families across the nation and rescued us from potentially a Great Depression, but done more than in 3 years than most presidents get done in 8. And so, anybody who says he is not up to the job is just wrong.
Mm-hmm. One last question. Obviously, transportation in the Chicago area is huge to the city's future in terms of growth. We're seeing the local CTA, RTA hitting what will likely be a financial cliff if something is not done. What can be done to help alleviate that situation going forward?
So if you're not aware, this is a national problem, right? What happened was the decline of ridership across the country in transit operations during COVID, and then a slower recovery than anybody would like. There was investment in just trying to keep the transit operations going in all these cities, and it did, but there's an end that's coming to the supports for those transit operations. So I think we're going to have to deal with it the way every other city's going to have to deal with it. It has something to do, obviously, with the fare box. It'll have something to do with where the money's coming from, how stable that source of income is for those transit operations. But we need subways and trains and buses. And it's vital to our economy. So we're going to do whatever is necessary. The General Assembly and I and the federal government significantly are all going to have to address it.
Okay. We're out of time.
You're not going to let anybody ask you a question?
Well, I've been asked. I've been asked a couple
okay,
too.
Fair enough.
So anyway, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great. Thank you.